Hello everyone, my name is Ross the Alcheminiaturist, and this is my first ever terrain build. I've been obsessed diagonally with Necromunda for probably as long as I've been back in this hobby. Necromunda started in about 1997 and has had a few iterations as well as a couple video games made of it. The concept of a small-scale skirmish game versus a full-scale army warfare has always seemed to intrigue me, but I've never had the time to actually go in and make my gang from one of the gangs that are there or one of the gangs that I've been mulling around at. That being said, I decided that the best way of action is to just jump in with both feet, lack of planning, and see where I end up. And that's brought us to this video today of Street Vendor. I started by cutting a section of foam board that I picked up from my local dollar store. I then added isopropyl alcohol and spread it around the board to have it start loosening up the glue. This is a great way to find out how many cuts you have in your hands. Make sure that you oversaturate your board as you can dry it out, but undersaturating means that the glue will not dissolve properly. Using a piece of flat balsa wood, I applied pressure and pushed with it against the paper backings to have them peel off in a relatively easy manner. I had read and watched a few guides on how to take off the paper backing. Heat gun, hairdryer were a popular suggestion, as was just peel it, it isn't that hard. But the only thing that actually worked for me was the isopropyl alcohol. When it comes to cutting, make sure you measure a few times to make sure that you have the right cut. You can only cut downwards and remove. You can never add back. Forgoing that, I decided to just use the wooden block that would become the base of this build, as it was the exact template and I would not have to worry about messing anything up. The next step was to take 3 small strips of the same size that I cut out and measure them against a regular size model. You may remember this particular Marine from the "How many Marines can you get from one box" video. Using his height as the standard, I then cut in a small slat into one of the strips as it would act as the front of the stall, folding it over to give it a little bit more length. Once that part was glued, I glued the other sides to each other using superglue as well, and then, after measuring wooden skewers that I had bought, I cut 2 of them in half to act as poles that will be holding up the roof. Once the skewers were safely secured, I set down even more glue where the sides and the skewers would be resting onto the wooden base, placing it down gently, as I have terrible luck getting myself stuck to my projects and my models with superglue. Securing the roof, like everything else, with more glue was really easy. 4 dollops, place in the right place, and boom, done. Next came the sign. Now I had great hope for this sign. Let me tell you, it was a pain to get the sign to cooperate. Firstly, I had to make it fit, but slanted, and shaving off a perfect degree with a blade the first time is no easy feat. Next, it didn't want to stay up, like, at all. I ended up having to use the skewer edges, points, to make sure to keep it upright. Once all this construction was done and dry, it was painting time. I tested the paints on a scrap piece of foam board to make sure that I wasn't going to completely ruin my build by melting it. That would have honestly been devastating. It worked, and so on to priming everything with AK's black primer. Before priming, I took silly putty and wrapped it around the poles so that the wood on the poles would stay wood and not black. I wanted to make sure that I had a nice semi-even prime coat set on the stall before I started with the actual colors. I wanted some more dark tones as well as shadows built in. I did prime the wood base, however, because I had plans to make it more of a metal look than the wood one. Next up, we're priming the barrels that I had 3D printed out. I primed them black, and once they were dry, I took more silly putty and wrapped them around all but the metal bands, so that I could spray on some Ironbreaker, a silver metal color by Citadel. The barrels, the sign, and the floor of the stall all got a coat of Ironbreaker to add a more metal feel to them. Switching to Vorbak red to start with the red tones, I focused on the floor to start and created a trail of old blood from the back of the stall to the counter, as if there had been a lot of fresh meat being sold from its vendor. I then added a layer of Blood Angel's red to add a more fresh feeling to the floor. With the floor well and truly bloody, I had to come up with a way of getting customers over to the stall. And what better way than to have a nice yellow sign with some words on it? Spraying a base of Phalanx yellow onto the sign first meant that anything I put on it would hopefully stand out more, as the yellow is just so bright. To add a little more to the brightness and therefore hopefully drawing nature of this stall, I painted the sides with Akryl's sky blue. You probably had noticed that the yellow and blue are not the most opaque and nice of paint jobs, and that is by design. I wanted this stall to look like he had not spent the most amount of money on it. Most likely spray painted and kind of hobbled together. I then used Akryl's coal black to make a background on the yellow background so that the words would pop and go better onto it. Taking my brush and wetting it, I then pulled some of the still wet paint down in wavy lines to make it appear like the vendor had used too much paint when painting the sign. More sky blue was used to make the sign. I actually practiced the writing and how I wanted it to look a couple of times so that I didn't have to erase my project and go back. He's not a smart man, obviously spelling meat like meat and not meat the first go around. Crossing out his mistake and adding the correct letter over top of it afterwards to make sure that everybody understood exactly what he was selling. I also added a more hastily looking fresh to the top of the sign. No, you're not getting no offcuts of no bad animal meat here. Quickly painting both barrels with Rghynox hide and then dry brushing a little screaming skull onto them, they were ready to be bloody too. Giving the barrels the same red treatment as the floor and gluing them down, it was time to call this build finished. I'm quite pleased with it, and I cannot wait to do more builds of similar, if not more complicated, style as I get better. Thank you for joining me in this learning experience. We'll see you all next time, and until then, bye.